What if the Church couldn't erase the Knights Templar, or the truth they carried? Uncover the forbidden history of power, faith, and betrayal in this calm cinematic story designed to help you relax, drift, and dream through history. On that fateful day, towering fires consumed the condemned. Across the entirety of France, Templar Knights were forcibly removed from their residences. Accusations of heresy, treason, idolatry, and enmity toward God were leveled against them. Yet, a disquieting dissonance permeates the narrative. The specific charges appeared unusually bizarre and overtly dramatized. A bearded effigy, an illicit kiss upon the spine, and a demonic entity known as Baphomet. This dichotomy suggests either a fabricated heresy concocted by the Church to dismantle the Templars, or that the Templars themselves concealed an even more profound and sinister truth. Regardless of its nature, the full truth did not perish in those flames. It persists, veiled beneath the ashes, awaiting its revelation. However, it is imperative to temper this initial shock and proceed with measured contemplation. The immediate fervor has subsided, and the metaphorical smoke has dissipated. What remains are faint echoes, whispers interred within subterranean vaults, narratives meticulously transcribed onto parchment, and subtle etchings within the forgotten recesses of ancient cathedrals. For those possessing sufficient patience and attentiveness, these historical reverberations gradually manifest. Our current exploration leads us precisely into this profound stillness. This is not the familiar Paris of contemporary imagination, devoid of vibrant cafes and romantically illuminated bridges. Instead, we encounter a city of unpaved, muddy thoroughfares, an atmosphere thick with smoke, and austere stone cloisters where authority operates with subtle influence. It is the autumn of 1307. The sky is foreboding. Somewhere within the metropolis, a solitary bell tolls, not to signify the passage of time, but to announce the inception of an event characterized by chilling coordination. Concurrently, an identical sequence of events unfolds throughout France. A single order targeted, a singular date of execution, a sweeping and silent operation. For nearly 2 centuries, the Knights Templar had endured as formidable entities. They were revered as holy warriors, monastic figures wielding swords, dedicated to safeguarding pilgrims and participating valiantly in the Crusades. Their architectural prowess resulted in castles surpassing royal fortifications in strength. Yet, with equal discretion, they constructed an even more formidable infrastructure, an extensive international financial network. This encompassed deposits, loans, and secure storage facilities. Intriguingly, Europe's most impregnable vaults were not under monarchical control. They belonged to the temple, a circumstance that rendered them inherently precarious. By the early 14th century, King Philip IV of France, an individual renowned for his brilliance, ambition, and perpetual insolvency, found himself in a state of desperation. He had subjected his populace to oppressive taxation, engaged in protracted and costly wars, and even expelled the Jewish community, seizing their assets. The Templars represented the last substantial repository of wealth. Moreover, their independence presented a significant challenge. Their paramount allegiance was to the Pope, not to Philip. However, Clement V, the reigning pontiff, was by no means an impartial observer. Installed through Philip's influence and residing within France, Clement's neutrality was severely compromised. Through a combination of pressure, persuasion, and likely coercion, he ultimately acquiesced. With this concession, the apparatus of suppression commenced its operation. Templars faced accusations of unspeakable transgressions, desecrating the cross, venerating idols, participating in clandestine initiations, and engaging in the infamous Devil's Kiss. These charges resonated more with the sensationalism of a heretical drama than with credible legal indictments. Nevertheless, they proved effective. Under duress, many confessed, subsequently recanted, and then confessed once more. The ensuing trial spanned several years. Yet, a deeper inquiry prompts the question, what if this ordeal transcended a mere fabrication? What if certain aspects of these narratives, however distorted, contained a kernel of truth? The Templars undeniably harbored secrets, layers upon layers of them. These included symbols meticulously carved into chapel walls, initiation rites orally transmitted, and perhaps a treasure that no monarch ever unearthed. This is where the historical murmurs intensify. They emerge from subterranean castle chambers, from parchments lost for centuries, from archival records that mysteriously vanished, and from persistent rumors of clandestine escape routes and fleets that disappeared prior to the arrests. This also explains the enduring refusal of the Templar myth to diminish. Before delving further into these enigmatic shadows, consider extending your engagement by supporting insightful historical exploration. This narrative transcends a mere judicial process. It illuminates how power can selectively reinterpret the past and how certain accounts steadfastly refuse to remain interred. The betrayal, like many such events, commenced in profound silence. There were no fanfare or charging cavalry, only sealed directives delivered clandestinely and to be unsealed at dawn. It was Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, and as the initial light diffused across slate rooftops and dew clung to narrow alleyways throughout France, a meticulously executed purge was already in progress. The Knights Templar, once esteemed as Christendom's heroes, remained oblivious to their impending condemnation. One can readily envision the scene: a knock at the gate of a preceptory. A sleep-addled knight opens the door, afforded no time to inquire before soldiers forcefully enter. This identical pattern unfolded in numerous towns and cities, including Lyon, Troyes, and Limoges. The order was apprehended in a single, synchronized maneuver. The arrests encompass not only leaders but also initiates, clerks, scribes, cooks, anyone affiliated with the distinctive Red Cross. This was not an impulsive act, but a masterpiece of deliberate planning. King Philip IV had meticulously prepared in secret for weeks. Every bailiff, every sheriff, every trusted commander played a specific role. The full scope of the operation remained unknown until the designated hour. Templars were apprehended under sealed letters distributed across the realm, with stringent instructions that they were not to be opened until the morning of the operation, a strategic chess move involving 1,000 pieces, each impeccably positioned. However, a peculiar aspect of this event is noteworthy. France was not engaged in warfare, nor had there been any public insurrection or scandalous revelation. One day, the Templars were devout servants of the Church. The next, they were denounced as heretics, idolaters, enemies of Christ, and, perhaps most incriminatingly, custodians of suspect wealth. The official justification for the mass arrests was heresy, with sensational charges presented: denial of Christ, desecration of the cross, worship of an anomalous head, secret rites involving indecorous gestures, and whispered oaths. This narrative bore a stronger resemblance to a fervent medieval nightmare than to a legitimate legal indictment. Yet, Philip required more than mere drama. He needed legitimacy. Consequently, he exerted significant pressure on Pope Clement V to endorse the action, and Clement initially hesitated. The Pope was, in fact, initially surprised by Philip's actions. Technically, the Templars answered directly to him, not to any monarch. However, Philip's strategy was astute. Once the accusations were disseminated, public apprehension escalated. The Church, already facing scrutiny and political pressure, found itself cornered. Therefore, in the subsequent weeks, Clement issued a papal bull authorizing the arrest and trial of Templars not only in France, but across Europe. This effectively transformed a royal vendetta into a matter of holy concern. The scale of the operation was astonishing. Hundreds of knights imprisoned, properties confiscated, vaults opened, and inventories meticulously documented. In Paris, Grandmaster Jacques de Molay himself was apprehended, alongside the head of Normandy and other high-ranking officials. These were not rogue elements. They had recently dined with the king and paid him homage. They were entirely unaware of their imminent downfall. An unshakable historical fact at the core of this period is the unparalleled speed and magnitude of these arrests. Historians concur that it constituted one of the most efficient, widespread, and coordinated actions of its kind in medieval Europe, catching the Templars entirely off guard. Yet, an obscure detail continues to provoke inquiry. In the days immediately following the arrests, some Templar strongholds were found to be empty, their documents removed, and chests missing. It was as if a warning had been issued, or perhaps certain individuals within the order had accurately perceived the unfolding dangers and discreetly disappeared into the night. This leads to a significant, unresolved historical question. How many Templars evaded capture that morning? Was the French crown truly successful in apprehending every member? Or were key individuals already in concealment, embarking on ships, or dissolving into loyal territories beyond the king's jurisdiction? In the aftermath, a peculiar situation arose. While French authorities extolled their efficiency, notable discrepancies were observed. Entire inventories listed as absent, and ships departing port without cargo, never to return. Rumors circulated regarding escapes, resistance, and even a secret fleet departing from La Rochelle, the Templars' principal naval base on the Atlantic coast. Although historical records offer no concrete evidence of such a fleet, the very persistence of the narrative suggests vulnerabilities within the dragnet. Returning to that chilling morning, the silence was, in retrospect, never absolute. Across Europe, some Templars simply vanished. Not all were apprehended. Some integrated into rural communities, while others found sanctuary in sympathetic courts. In Scotland, Portugal, and certain regions of the Holy Roman Empire, Templar knights quietly resurfaced under different identities, or, in some cases, never reappeared at all. The reality is that an entire order cannot be eradicated overnight. Uniforms can be incinerated, and confessions coerced through torture, but ideas, oaths, and loyalties are far more resilient. Thus, the initial chapter of the Purge concluded not with triumphant bells or clashing swords, but with secured doors, hushed corridors, and the faint aroma of parchment smoldering in a hearth. What commenced that morning was not merely a mass arrest. It was the prelude to a trial unbound by physical walls or chronological constraints, the deliberate turning of history's unmasked blade. One can either trace the flow of capital or the currents of fear, yet in this narrative, both pathways converge upon the same two figures, one clad in crimson, the other in royal blue. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, despite little fairness in his character, was a tall, handsome, and emotionally detached monarch who governed with profound mistrust, a sentiment not without justification. His kingdom was burdened by immense debt. Protracted conflicts with England and Flanders had depleted the treasury. Even the royal mint had been debased, its coinage altered to stretch the meager remaining silver reserves. Merchants voiced their discontent, nobles grew restive, and the populace observed their bread prices escalate while taxes rose relentlessly. Philip had already exploited and then expelled the Jewish population, subsequently doing the same to the Lombard bankers who had extended excessive credit and demanded unreasonable returns. Still, the crown's finances remained precarious. Inevitably, his gaze turned to the Templars. By 1300, the Knights Templar had transcended their roles as mere warriors or monks, becoming Europe's most discreet and influential bankers. They possessed vast landholdings across Christendom, from Portugal to Hungary. They extended loans to nobles, safeguarded pilgrim deposits, and managed an intricate, far-reaching network of financial operations that few fully comprehended, and many, including monarchs, profoundly envied. Philip himself was not merely a borrower, but profoundly indebted to the Templar. Some historical sources indicate that he owed them the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of florins, a sum sufficient to raise an army, capable of bankrupting a throne, and potent enough to shatter an alliance. Imagine standing in Philip's court, amidst velvet tapestries, the heavy scent of incense, and the knowing glances among advisors who anticipated the inevitable. Philip desired not merely the Templars' demise, but required it. However, he could not act unilaterally against an order directly sanctioned by the Pope. Enter Clement V, recently elected, diplomatically cautious, and residing not in Rome but in Avignon, far from the traditional seat of papal power. Some characterize Clement as a mere puppet, while others view him as a pragmatist attempting to avoid political annihilation. Regardless, he was deeply enmeshed in Philip's sphere of influence and perhaps under his direct financial sway. Here lies a well-documented fact. Clement V did not initiate the charges against the Templars. He was, in fact, caught unaware by Philip's arrests. Yet, once the suppression commenced, Clement did not halt it. Instead, he legitimized it. In 1307, he issued the papal bull Pastoralis Praemunentiae, instructing monarchs across Europe to detain Templars and confiscate their assets. The Vatican, like Philip, harbored its own justifications. The Holy Land had been lost, the Crusader ideal in ruins. The Templars no longer possessed an active battlefield, and their official purpose had become ambiguous. To some within the Church, they had outlived their utility. To others, they represented a growing threat, independent, organized, wealthy, and accountable solely to the Pope. Still, Clement hesitated. He called for inquests and requested evidence, but by then, the machinery of destruction was accelerating irrevocably. Confessions, extracted under torture, were voluminous. Property was being catalogued and redistributed, and Philip, ever the tactician, ensured public sentiment remained in his favor. He presented the Templars not as fallen knights, but as clandestine heretics, devils in mail, corrupting the very house of God. This brings us to an obscure and unsettling detail, found in a letter exchanged between royal advisors. In it, one of Philip's men openly discusses the political advantage of prejudging the Templars as guilty before any formal trial could even commence. Public perception, it appeared, was yet another battleground. The Templars, naturally, repeatedly denied the charges, but under torture, many confessed, only to recant once the pain ceased. Their words became distorted echoes, instruments for both kings and clerics. A confession here, a denial there, enough ambiguity to justify the impending destruction. Subsequently, bribes, clandestine deals, and whispered agreements behind cathedral walls emerged. Some knights were released after cooperation, others were permanently silenced. Amidst these developments, Clement issued additional bulls, some vague, others contradictory. The Pope, attempting to navigate the storm, often appeared overwhelmed by it. This leads to one of the great unresolved questions of the Templar trials. Was Clement complicit or merely cornered? Did he truly believe the charges, or did he simply fear the repercussions of opposing Europe's most powerful monarch? The Church had much to lose. Its unity was fragile, its authority questioned. Had Clement fully exonerated the Templars, it might have triggered a schism, not only with France, but with other nervously observing kingdoms. The safer course, it seems, was ambiguity, delay, and ultimately dissolution. However, a closer examination of the documents sealed in Avignon reveals a different narrative. Some were stamped, others never dispatched. Records exist of letters drafted and then shelved, bulls prepared and then retracted. The archives convey a quieter story than the chronicles, one of doubt, indecision, and perhaps of guilt. Let us retrace our steps. Recall that morning of October 13th, the rapidity of the arrests, the precision of a plan that originated not from panic but from strategy, supported, however reluctantly, by the only individual capable of legitimizing it, the Pope. The irony is almost theatrical. The Templars had fought for God, shed their blood for Christendom, yet in the end, they were undone by the very institutions they had served: crown and cross, king and pope, a royal debt, and a papal silence. Such foundations cannot simply be incinerated. One descends into the darkness incrementally, each step a creaking sound. The air grows heavier, the stone walls dampen acoustics, until only one's own breath faintly echoes within the vaulted chamber below. This is the genesis of the confessions, derived not from conviction or remorse, but from this very environment. We are now within a medieval prison, the type constructed beneath castles and behind chapels. Iron rings line the walls. A wooden bench is positioned beneath a system of ropes and pulleys. Torchlight flickers against a rusted grate in the floor. In these confines, veracity held less import than the predetermined narrative, and the men of the cloth, some of them at least, had assumed the roles of orchestrators of suffering. It is an undisputed fact that torture was central to the Templar trials, one of the few aspects no chronicler could embellish or deny, commencing almost immediately after the arrests. King Philip IV's agents required confessions, not merely as substantiation, but as validation. Public opinion was a fragile entity. One could not simply assert that a holy order had embraced heresy and anticipate widespread belief. Voices were needed, witnesses, words extracted from the mouths of the accused. Thus, the pressure was applied, quite literally. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master himself, was among the first to face interrogation, alongside other senior leaders. He was transported to the infamous Temple prison in Paris. The irony of its name was lost on no one. Once a Templar stronghold, it now served as the stage for their undoing. Under immense duress, physical, psychological, and spiritual, many knights confessed. Some admitted to desecrating the cross, others to denying Christ. A few even spoke of venerating a mysterious head. However, the details were peculiar, inconsistent, and often fantastical, almost invariably followed by recantation. An obscure testimony originates from a knight named Jean de Oline. His confession mutated so frequently under repeated torture sessions that the inquisitors themselves began to contradict one another. One scribe recorded that he had observed a head resembling that of a cat, while another described it as a woman's face adorned with silver. Neither could agree on its location, or whether it possessed the faculty of speech. Yet by then, the specific details held little significance. What mattered was the appearance of culpability. The Pope himself was disquieted by the reports, not solely by the content, but by the methods employed. In 1308, Clement V ordered a cessation of the Inquisitions and requested that Templars receive fairer treatment, advocating for church-led investigations rather than purely royal ones. Nevertheless, the damage was already wrought. The initial wave of torture had irrevocably shaped the narrative. Among the most brutal devices utilized was the strapado, a technique as simple as it was devastating. A prisoner's hands were bound behind his back, and he was then suspended by a rope from the ceiling, dislocating his shoulders. This method left no visible wounds, making it legally convenient. However, the pain was excruciating, and it shattered many men who had endured far worse on the battlefield. One contemplates their thoughts in those final moments of silence before the ropes tightened. Did they pray? Did they curse the crown? Or did they still harbor faith that the church would intervene? The system possessed a grim efficiency: confess, and one might survive; refuse, and the interrogation would persist; recant later, and one would be branded a relapsed heretic facing the pyre. This was not justice, it was an arithmetic calculation. A scholarly question that continues to resonate beneath the surface is this: how much of our understanding of Templar heresy originates from truth, and how much from agony? Does any validity adhere to the more bizarre accusations, such as the idol Baphomet, when they only emerged after men had been subjected to extreme torment? Some historians contend that Philip's agents preemptively introduced such imagery, thereby establishing a set of anticipated responses. Others believe that internal rites may have been misunderstood or deliberately misrepresented by external observers, where a symbolic gesture transmuted into a scandal, a whispered phrase into evidence of blasphemy. And then there is the case of Geoffroy de Gonneville, a respected knight. He initially resisted confession, even under torture. However, when he later recanted what he had been forced to admit, he was condemned, nonetheless burned alive, not for heresy, but for daring to contradict the established narrative. Recall the eerie precision of the arrests mentioned previously, the sealed letters, the synchronized dawn raids. That same meticulous choreography extended into the chambers of torment. Testimonies were collected and duplicated. Some were disseminated in courts and churches, others were destroyed or redacted, for not all confessions proved useful. Some Templars steadfastly refused to implicate others. Some described their initiation ceremonies in straightforward, unremarkable terms. No demons, no idols, merely vows, prayers, and the kiss of peace. Such records tended to vanish or were deemed insufficient. Let us connect this to what preceded it. Philip possessed a motive. Clement harbored hesitation. Now, with pain as an instrument, Philip possessed evidence, or something sufficiently convincing to pass for it. And Clement, constrained by public opinion and political alliances, could only attempt to manage the aftermath. Yet, even in that darkness, glimmers of resistance emerged. Some knights opted for silence. Some endured without ever confessing. Others left behind writings, hidden, obscure, encrypted, like ghostly fingerprints, as if to proclaim, "We were here, and it was not as they told you." The Templar trials were not about uncovering truth, they were about manufacturing one. A version that served the crown, that fueled the pyre. And beneath it all, the quiet question persists. If history is sufficiently squeezed, what ultimately emerges, truth or obfuscation? The path now turns southward, away from the dungeons and into a different kind of shadow, the one left by ink that vanished for centuries. One walks alongside the Vienne River, where the breeze is cooler, and ahead rises Chinon Castle. Not a fortress built for battle, but a place of stone corridors, hidden alcoves, and hushed conversations far removed from Paris. The year is 1308, and an extraordinary event is about to unfold, one that would remain concealed for nearly 7 centuries. Chinon represented a pivotal moment. Not in terms of spectacle, there were no public pyres here, no torch-wielding crowds, but within its ancient walls, a secret absolution was quietly committed to parchment. This document would then vanish, unnoticed, into the Vatican archives, only to be rediscovered in 2001. It is known as the Shinon parchment, and it may well be the single most inconvenient piece of evidence in the entire Templar saga. To comprehend its significance, one must re-enter that stone chamber. The Pope, under immense pressure from all factions, dispatched his emissaries to interrogate the highest-ranking Templars still living: Jacques de Molay, Geoffroy de Charny, Hugues de Perrot, and 2 others. These were no longer broken men in chains. Here, they were afforded dignity, time, and even confession free from torture. What they admitted was intriguing. Yes, they had ritually denied Christ under duress during initiation ceremonies, but they had done so only symbolically. Yes, there were unusual ceremonies, but not blasphemous ones, certainly not as the king had alleged. They implored forgiveness, and the emissaries, acting on behalf of the Pope, granted it. This is a well-documented historical fact. In 1308, the Church discreetly absolved the Templar leadership. The Chinon parchment recorded this. The Pope was aware, and yet, the suppression continued. One might question, if Clement V had absolved them, why did the trials proceed? Why were the Templars still excommunicated, their property seized, their leaders ultimately immolated? The answer lies not in faith, but in fear. Clement feared the repercussions of opposing Philip IV. France wielded excessive power, and the accusations were too deeply ingrained in the public consciousness. Consequently, the absolution was shelved, the parchment stored and forgotten. It remained hidden within the Vatican's secret archives, until a researcher serendipitously discovered it centuries later, misfiled under an incorrect reference code. This is an obscure detail. The Church had already cleared the Templars and elected to take no public action. This raises a question that scholars continue to debate today. Was Clement attempting to preserve the Church's unity by sacrificing justice? Or was the absolution itself a performative act, offering temporary solace to dying men while allowing the machinery of erasure to relentlessly advance? Consider further. While Clement was publicly sanctioning inquiries into Templar heresy, he was privately acknowledging that the most severe charges lacked foundation, that the order, though perhaps flawed, was not demonic, and that the accusations of idol worship, Baphomet, and obscene rituals were exaggerations, distortions, or outright fabrications. Recall from earlier chapters the torture chambers and the inconsistent confessions, the strappado and the symbolic gestures warped into proof. Chinon served as the antithesis of that cruelty, a quiet attempt to broker peace after the public damage had been inflicted. Yet, no public proclamation followed. No edict of innocence was read from cathedral pulpits. Instead, the Templar leaders were left to languish in their cells, their absolution sealed away with wax and silence. This moment at Chinon represents a definitive fracture line. Before it, the Templars still harbored hope. After it, that hope became a whisper audible only to the castle walls. Moreover, Molay and his fellow knights were not informed that their absolution would be concealed. As far as can be determined, they believed the Church had publicly forgiven them, that their suffering had not been in vain. This renders their eventual fate execution by fire without further trial all the more cruel. They died believing one version of history, while another was meticulously archived. One now stands in Chinon, centuries later. The parchment has been translated, the ink is faded, but the words are legible. They recount a different story from the one the world has reiterated for generations. Not of heretics, but of broken men seeking forgiveness. Not of devil worship, but of symbolic gestures, misunderstood or manipulated. And yet, somehow, it altered nothing, for the prevailing narrative had already advanced. Philip possessed the confessions he desired. Property was being seized. The trial, already progressing toward its climax, could not be reversed. The Chinon parchment was a candle lit too late, its light swallowed by the storm. Even now, the document brings forth uncomfortable truths. Why was it hidden? Who chose to misfile it? Was it incompetence or something more deliberate? And what would have transpired had it been made public? Would the order have been spared? Or had the execution already become inevitable, the machinery of power too vast to halt? This serves as a callback to Section 3, where the political dynamics between Pope and King left Clement paralyzed. Chinon reveals that paralysis in its purest form, a man who knew the truth and nevertheless chose silence. And in that silence, the kindling was stacked, the ropes tied, the stage prepared. One departs from Chinon now, but the echoes persist, Not screams, not chants, but a quiet rustling of parchment, a seal pressed into wax, and the particular absolution that arrives far too late. The door creaks open again, not to a prison cell this time, but to a darker corridor, illuminated solely by rumor and the fevered imaginings of frightened men. One has now transitioned beyond the realm of official records and parchment into something more elusive. Here, symbols hold greater weight than swords, shadows whisper more loudly than facts. And at the epicenter of it all resides a name that continues to unsettle: Baphomet. Few terms in the history of the Templar trials carry such a burden of connotation. Even fewer are as persistently misinterpreted. The name first emerges in the trial records from the early confessions, murmured by Templar prisoners who, under duress, spoke of a mysterious head or idol referred to as Baphomet. But what exactly was it? And, more crucially, did it possess any actual existence? Let us begin with the historical fact. The term Baphomet first appears in the Latin records of the Inquisitions. It was not widely known prior to that. Several knights, when interrogated, referred to a head. Some asserted it possessed a beard. Others claimed it was covered in silver. A few even described it as having 3 faces. However, almost none could agree on its symbolic significance. One declared it an object of veneration. Another maintained it possessed magical powers. Most likely, they were grasping for words amidst their torment. Modern scholars generally posit that the name Baphomet may have been a corruption of Muhammad or Mahomet, a calumnious accusation prevalent in medieval Europe, where enemies of the church were frequently conflated with Islamic heresy. Others argue it was a misheard phrase or a garbled rendition of a foreign word misunderstood by French-speaking interrogators. At the time, however, none of this mattered. The mere mention of an unknown deity was sufficient to ignite widespread panic, and it was not solely Baphomet. The Templars were accused of other strange rites, denying Christ during initiations, spitting on crucifixes, exchanging secret kisses in darkened rooms, sometimes upon the base of the spine. Yes, truly. This last detail led to the charge of the so-called devil's kiss, a claim so lurid, it reads less like testimony and more like ecclesiastical fan fiction. But again, the question persists. Were these practices actual or imagined? Here is an obscure detail buried within one of the trial transcripts. A Templar initiate, when questioned about the infamous kiss, responded with confusion. He admitted to being kissed on the mouth by his superior as a symbol of peace and unity, but nothing more. There was no eroticism, no perversion, merely ritual brotherhood. However, when the inquisitors repeated the question, this time with greater sternness, his answer shifted. The kisses moved downward, the meaning darkening. Under torture, truth bends like heated metal. This brings us to the scholarly debate that continues to smolder quietly. Did the Templars actually practice esoteric rites that were later misinterpreted, or were these entirely fabricated by their adversaries? Some researchers believe the order's initiations were intentionally secretive and symbolic, echoing older Gnostic or Eastern Christian rites brought back from the Holy Land. Others insist the entire affair was a fabrication designed to justify the destruction of a wealthy, independent power. The charges were so extravagant and inconsistent that even contemporaries doubted their veracity. Yet, they persisted. And why? Because symbols are tenacious, especially when they evoke fear. The image of a bearded idol, the concept of hidden knowledge, the threat of perversion cloaked as piety. These were not merely accusations. They were nightmares projected onto robes and swords. And when repeated often enough, even the most absurd image, say, a silver head prophesying, begins to seem plausible. Let us not forget what transpired earlier. In Chinon, we observed that the Pope himself privately absolved the Templar leaders, and that the most severe accusations, including idol worship, were deemed unproven. Yet, that quiet truth was subsumed by louder falsehoods. Baphomet survived the trials not because it was real, but because it was expedient. Over time, the legend evolved. During the Enlightenment, it transformed into a symbol of hidden wisdom. In the 19th century, occultists like Eliphas Levi reinterpreted Baphomet as a goat-headed figure, arms outstretched, one pointing heavenward and the other to earth, a symbol of duality, balance, and arcane truth. However, that figure, the one that might now come to mind, bears no connection to the medieval trials. It is an artistic invention, a retroactive myth. Still, the name endures, as if truth were irrelevant, as if the accusation itself possessed its own sacred weight. One final observation regarding the heads. During the raids on Templar properties, no physical idol matching the trial descriptions was ever discovered. No silver face, no speaking relic, nothing with horns or hidden inscriptions, only words, only fear, and the unspoken understanding that something powerful had to be eradicated. So what then was Baphomet? A code, a metaphor, a misunderstanding, a political weapon? All of these, or none. One departs from that chamber now, imbued with the faint scent of old incense and perspiration. The shadows still cling to one's awareness, and it is clearer now that symbols require no inherent reality to wield power. They merely need to be believed or feared. And for the Knights Templar, it was not swords or armies that sealed their doom. It was a name no one could explain, and everyone was afraid to disregard. One finds oneself in a chamber illuminated by candlelight now, redolent with the faint scent of old beeswax and leather-bound secrets. A scroll lies on the table, bearing a wax seal and a ring embossed with a red cross. The room is still, yet somewhere within the margins of these shadows, something stirs, whispers, not of weaponry, but of symbols. This constitutes the Templars' more subtle battlefield, not fields of combat or fortified structures, but code, cipher, and the maddening ambiguity of concealed meaning. Indeed, it was not solely the Templars' wealth or their whispered heresies that aroused suspicion. It was the pervasive sense that they possessed knowledge inaccessible to others, that behind the austere white mantles and solemn vows, the Order harbored secrets not merely political ones, but ancient, esoteric wisdom that had journeyed with them from the Holy Land, secreted within saddlebags, sealed behind stone, and transmitted orally in languages incomprehensible to outsiders. And perhaps the most unsettling aspect was their tacit acceptance. They did not truly deny it. Here is a historical fact. The Knights Templar were known to employ secret signs, gestures, and internal protocols that distinguished them from other orders. They maintained their own methods of identification. Initiation rites were conducted in privacy, even from lower-ranked members. They communicated across continents using codes embedded within seemingly ordinary correspondence. This practice was not anomalous for a military religious order operating across multiple borders. However, in an era where secrecy often equated to suspicion, it generated apprehension. And that is where imagination, as it invariably does, filled the voids. An obscure and controversial interpretation originates from a set of carved stones discovered at former Templar sites in Languedoc and Aragon. These bear what appear to be enigmatic markings, interlocking crosses, partially formed stars, inverted loops, none of which perfectly align with conventional Christian iconography. Some believe these constituted a symbolic code, perhaps linked to ancient numerologies or Eastern mysticism. Others contend they were merely stonemasons' marks, ordinary, functional, and misinterpreted. Naturally, in the aftermath of the trials, nothing remained ordinary for long. The notion took root that the Templars were guardians of hidden knowledge, that beneath their rigid discipline lay a repository of arcane insight, astronomy, sacred geometry, even Gnostic scripture, which they had uncovered in Jerusalem, something they could not, or would not, disclose. One may recall the earlier charges, the head of Baphomet, the clandestine kisses, the alleged idol. Now consider those not as isolated accusations, but as components of a larger enigma. Collectively, they began to form an image not merely of heresy, but of a clandestine world, a secret priesthood, a rival current within Christianity itself. And that image instilled greater fear than the Order's power ever did. This led to one of the most enduring scholarly debates. Were the Templars simply victims of their own mystique, or did they deliberately cultivate it? Were they concealing truths religious, political, esoteric that threatened church orthodoxy, or had their silence been permeated by paranoia and myth? Take, for example, the persistent rumor that the Templars possessed documents from the Temple of Solomon, ancient scrolls, secret histories, even relics connected to the earliest days of Christianity. None of these were, of course, discovered, but that did not suppress the stories. If anything, the absence of evidence only deepened the conviction that something had been secreted away. This serves as a callback to Section 6, where we explored the name Baphomet and the ambiguity of symbols. Within that same nebulous space, we now encounter gestures, hand signs used in initiation, phrases uttered in ritual, the peculiar manner in which one knight might place his hand on another's shoulder. Were these remnants of profounder teachings, or simply the guarded customs of a closed brotherhood? The Church desired certainty, the Crown demanded clarity, but the Templars offered neither, and that lack of transparency, coupled with their extensive reach and wealth, proved perilous. Let us also consider the visual language, the red cross on white, the twin knights on a single horse, emblems of poverty and brotherhood, yes, but also of duality. Symbols that hinted at meanings beyond the surface, and for those inclined to suspicion, that was sufficient. Even now, modern researchers meticulously examine surviving Templar buildings and manuscripts, searching for evidence of hidden writing, acrostics in Latin prayers, numeric patterns in floor tiles, star maps disguised as decorative motifs. Most of this inquiry yields no conclusive results, yet some elements cause one to pause. An 8-pointed star carved beneath a chapel in Tomar, Portugal, a fresco in Italy depicting a knight reaching into a chest filled not with gold but scrolls. Coincidences perhaps, or possibly remnants of something deliberately veiled. Centuries later, these mysteries would be reborn through groups claiming Templar descent or inspiration. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, secret societies adorned in robes and echoes. Many drew from Templar symbolism, whether authentically or not. The myth attained greater endurance than the facts ever could, which leads to a quiet realization. Perhaps that was always the intent, to preserve ambiguity, to cloak whatever truth remained in sufficient ritual, code, and half-spoken memory, that it could survive not in plain sight, but just beneath it. So one sits now in the half-light, parchment and hand symbols swirling at the periphery of comprehension, and the more profound question becomes clear. Not what the Templars concealed, but why we continue to search, to decode, to imagine that some deeper truth lies just beyond the next ciphered phrase. And perhaps, just perhaps, it does. One now traverses a vault, or at least its memory. The air is cool and arid, characteristic of a place where secrets are stored, not proclaimed. Stone walls press inward from all sides. A faint aroma of aged wood and cold iron lingers. One can almost discern the clang of a lock turning, the echo of retreating footsteps down a corridor long since sealed. Yet, however far one ventures, the treasure remains perpetually just beyond reach. Only the narrative endures. The Knights Templar were undeniably wealthy. This fact is undisputed. By the time of their dissolution in the early 14th century, they possessed thousands of properties across Europe and the Holy Land: farms, mills, vineyards, churches, and entire towns. They levied taxes, issued loans, and operated one of the most sophisticated financial networks in medieval Europe. Pilgrims entrusted them with their wealth. Monarchs relied on them to transport funds. The Church, too, placed its trust in them, until it did not. Consequently, when the hammer fell in 1307, the expectation was to discover vast hoards of treasure, gold, silver, precious relics. However, when King Philip IV's agents stormed Templar properties across France, they found very little: some furniture, livestock, a few ledgers, but the chests of bullion, the fabled caches, had vanished. This is where the mystery deepens, substantiated by a well-established fact. In the days preceding the mass arrests on October 13th, the Paris Temple, the Order's central treasury, exhibited unusual activity. According to royal records, several carts were observed departing the compound, guarded and unregistered, their destination unknown, their contents never itemized. Some speculate this was merely routine bookkeeping, repositioning resources, or moving assets for ordinary reasons. However, the timing appears too convenient, as if someone possessed foreknowledge of the impending events. This constitutes the unresolved question that continues to perplex historians. Did the Templars conceal their wealth in anticipation of their arrest? And if so, where did it go? Numerous theories, naturally, abound. Some suggest the treasure was smuggled to Scotland, where sympathetic lords kept it hidden. Others believe it was spirited away to Portugal, where the Templar Order subsequently transformed into the Order of Christ, quietly continuing under a new designation. A few fringe voices assert it ultimately ended up in Switzerland, even linking its disappearance to the emergence of secretive banking practices centuries later. And then there is the truly esoteric theory. The treasure consisted not of gold at all, but of knowledge, scrolls, relics, something too sacred or too perilous to leave in plain sight. An obscure but compelling detail can be found in a ship's manifest from La Rochelle, a major Templar port. Shortly after the arrests, a small fleet was reported departing the harbor. No names, no destinations, just a notation in maritime records that the vessels left under cover of night. The fleet was never seen again. Could it have transported the missing treasure? And what precisely was that treasure? For an order as affluent as the Templars, their accounting was surprisingly sparse. Some historians argue that wealth was primarily invested in property, not coinage. Yet even then, the confiscated lands failed to account for the rumored scale of their fortune. Something did not align. This brings us back to earlier chapters, to the coded rituals, the peculiar symbols, the whispers of hidden knowledge. Could the treasure have been something more abstract, a relic unearthed beneath Jerusalem, a document capable of undermining church doctrine, or perhaps something entirely symbolic, a myth forged equally by hope and fear? Consider the narrative of the Ark of the Covenant. Some believe the Templars discovered it during their initial years in the Holy Land and clandestinely removed it. Others claim they found scrolls detailing the bloodline of Christ, yes, that theory, and structured their secret rituals around protecting that truth. Most scholars dismiss these ideas, yet they persist, because the absence of treasure is its own form of invitation. It challenges us to imagine, and a callback awaits here from Chinon Castle, where absolution was whispered and sealed away, from Baphomet, whose head was never found, from the coded language whose meaning remains just out of reach. The missing treasure links them all, a common thread of what might have been, if only it could be found. Even King Philip, avaricious as he was, could not fully pinpoint it. His agents searched extensively, sifting through ledgers, interrogating priests, and even tearing up floorboards. But they never discovered the main cache, which might explain why the charges grew increasingly bizarre as the trial progressed. When gold cannot be found, demons are invented, and so the legend grew, a treasure so vast and sacred it had to be eternally hidden. Some believe it still exists, buried beneath Rosslyn Chapel or sealed inside a mountain vault in the Pyrenees. Others contend it was dispersed in fragments, protected by descendants of the Order who still live among us, cloaked not in armor but in anonymity. Yet, perhaps the true treasure was this: a story, a void into which we can pour our hopes, our suspicions, our fantasies, something to seek, something to ponder. And in this manner, the Templars achieved a form of immortality that no mere coin could purchase. One leaves the vault now, empty-handed, but not empty-hearted. For some treasures are not meant to be found, only pursued. The fire glows ahead, flickering against the evening sky like a second, cruel Sunday. It is the 18th of March, 1314, and one has reached the terminus of a path few dared contemplate. The square by the Seine in Paris is densely populated yet silent. People speak in hushed tones. Some avert their gaze. Others stare, transfixed, as if witnessing the final page of a sacred book being irrevocably torn away. On a raised timber platform, two bound figures stand. One bears the worn dignity of a man who has forfeited everything yet refuses to yield. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. There is no trial today, no jury, only kindling and a silence broken solely by the crackle of the torch as it is thrust into the wood. The well-established fact is this: after nearly 7 years in prison, Jacques de Molay was sentenced to perpetual imprisonment. However, when the sentence was publicly proclaimed, an unexpected event transpired. De Molay rose and publicly retracted his confession. Before the assembled crowd and the impending flames, he declared that he and his fellow Templars were innocent of the heresies leveled against them, that the order was pure, and that the confessions were falsehoods extracted from broken bodies. In that moment, those few defiant words irrevocably altered everything, for he was no longer merely a heretic, he was a threat. The king's agents acted without hesitation. That very evening, without appeal or delay, he was led to the stake. Alongside him stood Geoffroy de Charny, preceptor of Normandy. Both had been interrogated, both had confessed, and now both chose to burn rather than live with a lie. As the flames ascended, witnesses claimed de Molay invoked King Philip and Pope Clement to join him before the judgment seat of God within the year. And in a development that has fueled centuries of speculation, both men did, in fact, die within that year. Clement just a month later, Philip by the year's end. Coincidence? Divine justice? or simply the type of historical poetry that hindsight is so adept at crafting. However, it is the obscure details that lend a strange shimmer to the scene. Some reports indicate Desmoulins remained silent. Others state he cried out for vengeance. Still, others describe a serene expression on his face as the fire engulfed him. The contradictions only deepened the mystery, for with his death, something shifted. The Templars were gone, but their narrative was only just commencing. An obscure letter interred in the Vatican archives hints that not all within the church concurred with the execution. One cardinal, unnamed, reportedly wrote that Desmoulins' burning was not justice, but theater, a performance for the crown. And if one recalls the Chinon parchment, where the Pope had quietly absolved the Templars 6 years earlier, one comprehends the true tragedy of that performance. The absolved Grand Master burned nonetheless. A callback, too, to the treasure that vanished, to the symbols left unspoken, to the coded rituals and the rumors of Baphomet. All of it seemed to culminate here in smoke and ash. The questions continued to burn, but the man at their epicenter was silenced. The scholarly debate that endures centers not only on what Desmoulins articulated, but why it held such significance. Was it a calculated maneuver, an attempt to preserve honor in death? Was it a final repudiation of protracted falsehoods? Or was it simply the last breath of a man who had lost everything save for his faith? One might ponder why they did not simply allow him to fade away in prison. Why risk such a spectacle? Because silence can be potent, but so too can a scream. And Desmoulins' final act transformed the fire from a punishment into a beacon. The church had hoped to control the narrative. The crown had hoped to conclude the matter. But history possessed other designs. With a single outcry, the martyrdom of Jacques Desmoulins ignited a torch that would be carried into legend. And legend, as we have observed, is far more challenging to extinguish than flame. In the subsequent centuries, secret societies would invoke Desmoulins' name. Writers and revolutionaries would acclaim him as a symbol of resistance. His death would become not the conclusion of a chapter, but the prologue to 100 whispered tales. Even now, Templar-inspired organizations observe March 18th with solemn ceremonies, not because they possess definitive knowledge of what occurred, but because something about it continues to feel unresolved. And perhaps that is what endures, not merely the smoke, not merely the curse, but the profound weight of injustice veiled in holy vestments. One steps away from the scaffold now. The embers are cooling. The crowd disperses. Somewhere nearby, the Seine continues its flow, quiet, undisturbed. But behind, in that pile of ash, something sacred and unsettled remains. For one has witnessed men die for power, and others for pride. Yet here was a man who chose fire over falsehood, and in doing so, became something the church and crown never anticipated, a specter they could not banish. The halls of Avignon are hushed now. One walks softly, footsteps muffled by centuries of whispers trapped in stone. The air carries a faint chill, not from the season, but from the awareness that this place, this city of exiled popes and political shadows, once contained the echo chamber of the Templars' fate. And though the fires of Paris had claimed Jacques Desmoulins, here in Avignon, the machinery that destroyed him continued to operate, perhaps more quietly, yet no less deliberately. This was not Rome, not the sacred heart of the church. Avignon, by the early 14th century, had become the papal seat, a compromise to French influence, and a symbol of a power that had learned to whisper rather than roar. It is here that Pope Clement V issued the final blows against the Templar Order through bulls and decrees formulated behind closed doors and meticulously refined with caution. Here is a well-established historical fact. In 1312, under pressure from King Philip IV, Clement formally dissolved the Knights Templar through the bull vox in excelso. This was not a verdict. It was not even a trial outcome. The Pope explicitly stated that the order was not condemned by definitive judgment, but abolished by apostolic ordinance, a nuanced phrasing, slippery and ambiguous, as if the pen had been dipped in water rather than ink. This linguistic sleight of hand is crucial, for despite years of interrogation, torture, and trial, the Church had never conclusively proven the Templars guilty of heresy. Yet, they were dissolved nonetheless. Why? Because the alternative, exonerating them, would have shattered the fragile alliance between crown and cross. So Clement chose silence, and in doing so, condemned the order without ever uttering the word guilty. Now, let us peer into one of the more obscure corners of the archives. An unsigned letter, tucked within the correspondence between Avignon and various inquisitors in France. In it, a cleric expresses disquiet regarding the contradictions in testimony, how some confessions were obtained under torture, others retracted, many contradictory. The letter queries whether it would not be more prudent to proceed no further. It is a faint voice of doubt, swiftly buried, never pursued. Yet, it exists, a flicker of conscience within the operational machinery. And then there is the Chinon parchment, a document long concealed in the Vatican's secret archives and only rediscovered in 2001. We have discussed it previously, but here in Avignon, its context sharpens. The parchment contains the record of a private absolution granted to the highest Templar leaders, including de Molay, in 1308. They had confessed under pressure, yes, but showed repentance. The Pope, through his cardinals, forgave them. They were not condemned, not excommunicated. They were, in essence, restored. So why then were they burned? That is the question that still reverberates through the halls of Avignon. This brings us to a core scholarly debate. Did Pope Clement truly believe the Templars were guilty, or was he simply navigating the currents of political necessity? Was he coerced by Philip the Fair? Was he complicit? Or was he perhaps merely attempting to limit damage, to preserve the Church's image while avoiding outright confrontation? One may recall the fleet that vanished from La Rochelle, the treasure that slipped through the king's fingers, the codes and symbols that never yielded their secrets. Now, picture Clement, isolated in Avignon, holding 1,000 threads and observing each unravel in a different direction. The order was broken, but the truth remained entangled, and perhaps that is what disturbed him most. Here is a detail that often goes unnoticed. Clement's health rapidly deteriorated after the order's dissolution. He died less than a year after de Molay's execution, his final months shadowed by migraines and insomnia. Some claimed it was divine punishment, others poetic irony, but perhaps it was simply the burden of too many sealed letters, too many quiet choices made behind doors no one else could open. One wonders what he thought of de Molay's final words, whether they reached him, whether in the flickering silence of his papal quarters, he whispered back. Avignon became a city of echoes, papal bulls, sealed scrolls, inked decisions all flowing out from its corridors like smoke from a slow fire. But the contradictions lingered. Why exonerate a man in private, then allow him to burn in public? Why destroy an order if its guilt cannot be proven? And the most haunting echo of all, what truth was omitted from the official records? Because even now, gaps remain, pages missing from ledgers, testimonies redacted, entire trunks of documents vanished from the papal archives. Some attribute this to war or decay. Others believe it was deliberate, that certain truths were simply too dangerous to leave exposed. One passes beneath a stone arch now, sunlight dappling the ancient flagstones. There is no one here, not truly. Only the silence of paperwork once imbued with power. But that silence, it speaks. It suggests that history is not always written by the victors. Sometimes it is penned by those who fear the cost of truth. And as one steps back into the open air, the quiet lingers. Not because no one spoke, but because too many did, and none of them articulated the same thing. The door creaks open behind you, not to a chapel or a courtroom, but to a coastal path bathed in mist. The sea murmurs below, gentle waves eroding the stone. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cries, once, then falls silent. One can almost visualize it, a hooded figure slipping into a small boat, a coiled rope tossed aboard, a final glance over the shoulder. Then, gone, out into the fog. The Templars were intended to vanish, to be erased. Their leaders immolated, their assets seized, their legacy dispersed. But for all the fire and parchment, the final chapter refused to conclude. For while some knights were apprehended and tried, others, somehow, were not. They disappeared, not yet into myth, but into silence. And silence, as we have observed, can be a form of survival. Let us commence with the undeniable foundation of fact. Not all Templars across Europe were captured in the mass arrests of 1307. In regions such as Germany, Cyprus, and parts of England, the persecution was inconsistent and often met with resistance from local lords. In Scotland, the papal bull against the Templars remained largely unenforced, perhaps because Scotland was excommunicated at the time and held little interest in adhering to papal directives, a convenient circumstance for a knight seeking refuge. An obscure but tantalizing thread winds through Aragon and Catalonia, where Templar strongholds endured longer than anticipated. In some towns, arrests were delayed. In others, local clergy simply refused to credit the charges. And in the interim, documents, gold, and most importantly, individuals slipped away. La Rochelle, a name previously encountered, was a significant Templar port. According to some 14th century sources, a small fleet vanished from there in the days following the commencement of the arrests. It was never seen again. The records abruptly cease. No logs, no sightings, merely absence. Some believe this fleet transported treasure. Others suspect it carried something even more invaluable, the remaining leadership of the Order. Perhaps even pre-warned by sympathetic insiders, they may have set sail for regions where papal influence was tenuous and political pressure weaker. One enduring theory posits their destination as Scotland. Another points to Portugal, where the Order of Christ arose shortly thereafter, largely staffed by former Templars under a new name. And here emerges a controversial interpretation, enveloped in maritime legend and the thin veil between history and romance. Some claim that ships from the Templar fleet reached the New World long before Columbus, long before cartographers had even completed sketching the known world's boundaries. There are no credible maps to substantiate this, no surviving logs, only fragments, hints, Masonic murals, a tower in Newport, Rhode Island, whose architecture some assert resembles Templar design. Most historians dismiss this. Yet, the idea persists. A more grounded possibility is that many Templars simply reintegrated into society. Some became monks. Others joined military orders that had not yet been proscribed. A few may have lived as farmers under assumed identities. The Order had trained thousands of men in discipline, logistics, engineering, and combat. Those skills did not vanish with the brand, they merely relocated. In Portugal, the transition was practically seamless. King Dinas of Portugal negotiated with the Pope to transfer Templar assets into a new entity, the Order of Christ. This new order utilized the same infrastructure, the same symbols, with minor modifications, and many of the same knights. It was, effectively, the Templars in all but name, and through this order, Portugal would later initiate its golden age of exploration. That is a curious irony, is it not? That the suppressed might become the navigators of a new world. Let us briefly recall the coded language we previously explored, the signs, the rituals, the symbolic gestures. If a handful of Templars did survive, they would have required those tools more than ever. Secret handshakes were not mere dramatic flourishes. They were a means to distinguish friend from foe when one's very identity was outlawed. So, where did they all go? That is the unresolved question. Did they regroup, awaiting vindication? Or did they dissolve into the broader world, their story carried in whispers and shadows? Was there a grand plan for resurgence? Or did the Order fade with dignity, leaving only embers behind? What complicates the search is the mythology that proliferated in later centuries. Freemasonry, as we shall soon explore, absorbed many Templar symbols and themes. But whether that represents a true lineage or a romantic inheritance is fiercely debated. What we do know is this: the world desired the Templars to survive, needed them to. There is something irresistible about the concept of an outlaw brotherhood enduring in secret keepers of wisdom, protectors of treasure, silent sentinels observing from the periphery. And yet, it is possible the true survival was not about ships or gold. It was about memory, about the stories whispered in taverns, the emblems carved into stone, the peculiar rites that persisted in places far from Avignon's scrutiny. In the end, survival may not necessitate escape. It may simply require a narrative too enduring to erase. So now, one stands at the water's edge. The boat is gone, the mist is closing in. Behind you, history asserts closure. But ahead, beyond the fog, something else awaits. A possibility, a path that quietly converges into legend. The candlelight flickers against stone once more, but the carvings have transformed. The cross is absent. In its place, a compass, a square, a stylized eye gazing outward from a triangle. One has now advanced in time, several centuries from the fires of Paris. Yet, somehow, the air feels familiar, charged with the same silence, the same secrets. The Freemasons emerged into public consciousness in the 17th and 18th centuries, claiming roots in medieval stonemason guilds. Lodges proliferated across Europe, integrating ritual, morality, architecture, and philosophy into an elaborate symbolic system. They wore aprons, spoke in allegories, and prized the concealed meaning beneath the visible world. At first glance, there appears no compelling reason to link them with the Knights Templar, different eras, different objectives. However, a closer listen reveals more. One well-established historical fact is that Freemasonry, particularly in its speculative form, extensively drew upon older traditions and mythologies, medieval orders, biblical figures, esoteric philosophies. Among the most persistent symbolic inheritances was the mystique of the Templars. Many Masonic lodges began incorporating the Templar cross into their regalia. Some even adopted designations such as Knights Templar Commandery. By the 18th century, Templar-themed degrees had become common within certain Masonic rites, especially in the York and Scottish rites. Initiates underwent rituals said to mirror those of ancient knighthood, not actual knighthood, but the idealized concept of it, a revival or perhaps a reenactment, depending on one's interpretation. And here is an obscure detail. In 1740, a German book circulated under the title La Vérité des Templiers, The Truth of the Templars, asserting that the Freemasons were the legitimate heirs of the suppressed order. It even outlined a supposed line of succession, names transmitted in secret, rituals preserved in code. There is no hard evidence to support this lineage, but the book did not require evidence. It possessed an allure, and in the shadowy corridors of history, allure often proves more enduring than fact. This leads to one of the most hotly debated scholarly questions. Is there any genuine historical continuity between the medieval Templars and modern Freemasonry? The short answer is likely no. The longer answer is perhaps, but not in the manner commonly imagined. There is no documented survival of the Templar hierarchy beyond the early 14th century. No unbroken chain of leadership, no surviving parchment linking Jacques de Molay to a Masonic lodge. However, what did survive, perhaps more crucially, was the times idea, times of the Templars, their symbols, their perceived ideals of loyalty, secrecy, sacrifice, and resistance to corruption. These became integral to the Masonic imagination, and that imagination possesses power. We can trace a few faint connections, however. Recall Portugal's Order of Christ, where former Templars quietly continued under royal protection. This order played a key role in the Age of Exploration, influencing maritime navigation and scientific inquiry. Centuries later, several Portuguese Masons would claim spiritual ancestry from this same order. Whether that is fact or fiction remains unclear, but the thread was kept alive. Likewise, many early Freemasons were captivated by the Gothic style, arches, pillars, sacred geometry echoes of the churches and cathedrals the Templars had once built or funded. Some lodges went so far as to design initiation chambers that mimicked crypts or medieval vaults. Aesthetic mimicry, perhaps, but when paired with ritual language concerning lost wisdom and ancient brotherhoods, the resemblance begins to feel more than merely decorative. Now, let us recall the coded rituals the Templars were accused of, the secret signs and strange words. Imagine those transformed, sanitized, spiritualized into the moral allegories of Freemasonry. Imagine the torch passed not from man to man, but from myth to myth, from whispered accusation to chosen identity. In some modern Masonic rites, the initiate undergoes a trial, intended to symbolize death and rebirth. In Templar legend, too, there is death by fire and the rebirth of the order in secrecy. The symmetry is elegant, if not exact. It is tempting to assert that the Freemasons adopted the Templar myth for legitimacy. After all, linking oneself to a fallen, persecuted brotherhood conveys drama, gravitas, and inherent mystique. But what if it was not merely branding? What if it was a profound yearning, a desire to preserve something noble from the ashes, even if only in symbolic form? This brings us to one last theory, more poetic than provable, that the Templars survived not as a group, but as a specter, not in stone castles or papal ledgers, but in minds hungry for meaning. In the lodges of Freemasonry, that specter was given new garments, new oaths, new halls. It no longer required swords, it required symbols. Of course, skeptics dismiss this, arguing that the Templar link was fabricated during the Enlightenment, a means for secret societies to adorn themselves in medieval glamour. And they are likely correct, at least in part, but still, the compass glows faintly. The square catches the light, and above them both, the all-seeing eye watches, not with malevolence, but with memory. One departs the lodge now, walking slowly through a hall that may never have harbored a knight in armor. Yet, one senses their presence nonetheless, not literal, not provable, merely echoed. For sometimes history endures not in bloodlines or documents, but in the symbols we elect to believe. The room is colder than it should be, not from a draft or stone, but from something less tangible, a kind of historical hush. One stands within the Vatican's secret archives, or at least imagines it. Towering shelves loom in perfect rows. Scrolls, ledgers, handwritten decrees, centuries of history meticulously encased in leather, linen, or silence. Somewhere within these confines, the narrative of the Templars was intended to conclude neatly, conclusively. But, as one already knows, that did not transpire. For where records should exist, there are gaps. Where names should be present, there are redactions. Where justice should prevail, there is ambiguity. The well-established historical fact is that the Vatican maintained an extensive and meticulous record of the Templar trials, particularly in France. Testimonies were gathered, interrogations transcribed, papal bulls issued. Yet, when modern scholars gained access to those records, especially after Pope Leo XIII opened portions of the secret archives in the 1882, they discovered something peculiar, a pattern of disappearances not of individuals this time, but of pages. Entire volumes pertaining to the trials are either missing or heavily censored. Margins are darkened, parchments are meticulously scratched out. In one instance, a catalog from 1,628 lists a series of trial documents that no longer exist in the current collection. No explanation, no notation, simply gone. This is not to suggest that everything is missing. Much of the raw testimony remains. However, the absences feel targeted, as if someone once attempted not to erase the story entirely, but to reshape it, to control the narrative by removing problematic footnotes, the contradictions, the retracted confessions, the hesitant bishops, the dissenting cardinals. An obscure but compelling case concerns the Avignon notary, Raymond de Molins. His transcripts of certain Templar hearings appear in earlier inventories but vanish in later ones. His name fades from documents without explanation. Some suspect he recorded exculpatory testimony words the Church later preferred to forget. There is also the curious matter of the papal registers. These books, which document the internal workings of the pontifical court, exhibit abrupt gaps in correspondence from the crucial years around 1307 to 1314. Letters from inquisitors go unanswered. Orders from the Pope seem to disappear mid-dialogue, as if the conversation were edited in hindsight, much like a playwright trims a scene after opening night. And then, of course, the Chinon parchment, concealed for nearly 700 years in a file labeled miscellaneous, not filed with the main trial records, not referenced in key summaries. It is as though the absolution it contained, the quiet acknowledgement that the Templars had confessed under duress, had shown repentance, and had been granted forgiveness, was simply too inconvenient to leave on the main shelf. Let us recall once again the political stakes involved. King Philip IV's crushing debt, Clement V's delicate balancing act, the fire that consumed Jacques de Molay. All of it points toward a narrative too fragile to rest solely on unvarnished documents. Instead, the record was curated, not entirely falsified, merely blurred, like a painting retouched by a later hand, softening the harsh edges. And that leads us to the unresolved question: how much of what we know about the Templar downfall is true, and how much is missing because someone wished it to be so? There is a persistent theory that the Vatican, not out of malevolence but institutional instinct, practiced a form of archival correction, not to obliterate truth, but to safeguard orthodoxy. After all, if the Church had wrongly condemned a holy order, privately absolved them, then allowed them to burn anyway, well, that is not the kind of story one leaves conspicuously displayed. Some whisper about a lost liber, a rumored ledger detailing financial transactions between the Templars and various European nobles, possibly including Philip IV himself. No copy has ever been found. Some scholars believe it never existed. Others contend it is hidden, either in a private vault or was quietly destroyed centuries ago. And then there is the Vatican's Index of Forbidden Books, a list not only of heretical texts, but also of dangerous histories, books that question the official narrative, some of which link the Templars to mysticism, secret knowledge, or even a prophetic role in end times theology. Most of these books were suppressed before reaching wide audiences. Some, like Processus contra Templarios, were rediscovered only recently and released with little fanfare, like a whisper in a storm. One might anticipate outrage or scandal, but more often there is simply silence, because silence is the most effective eraser of all. No need to disprove, merely delay, redact, ignore. Yet, the lacunae themselves narrate a story. For with every vanishing page, curiosity intensifies. For every incinerated document, a rumor ignites. In a sense, the Templar narrative endures precisely because it was never allowed to conclude. Every missing piece invites speculation. Every smudge becomes a clue. One moves now through a corridor lined with locked drawers, each labeled in Latin, each one a coffin for facts too volatile to breathe. But somewhere within, perhaps, lies a parchment that eluded detection, a single thread left dangling. And when someone pulls it years from now, or perhaps tomorrow, another layer will peel away. Because silence does not signify the death of truth. It merely signifies its weight. One now stands in a chamber devoid of windows. The walls are smooth stone, pale and unmarked, as though time itself hesitated to inscribe its judgment here. This is not a courtroom, yet every aspect of it feels judicial. The heavy quiet, the unseen weight in the air, the sense that something momentous transpired, or was meant to, and perhaps that is precisely the core point. For after all the arrests, all the interrogations, all the fire and parchment and smoke, there was never a true verdict. The trial of the Templars concluded with a whisper, not with a declaration of guilt or innocence, but with a form of bureaucratic acquiescence. The order was dissolved, yes. The leaders were punished, yes. But were they condemned? Not precisely. Let us commence with the most foundational fact. In 1312, Pope Clement V issued Vox in Excelso, a bull that officially dissolved the Knights Templar. However, he made it explicitly clear that this was not a formal judgment. Instead, it was a pastoral decision based on the public scandal the order's continued existence would provoke. In other words, the Templars were not found guilty, they were found inconvenient. This might seem like a mere semantic distinction, but in legal and spiritual terms, it holds significant weight. It left the entire case unresolved, and it also created space for doubt, for speculation, for mythology to insinuate itself and take root. Now, recall the Chinon parchment, interred for centuries within the Vatican's shadows. It confirmed that the Templar leadership had confessed under duress and had been granted absolution. Had that document been publicized in 1312, it might have altered everything, but it was not. Instead, it remained hidden, and the narrative of the Templars solidified into a half-truth. One obscure detail from the Council of Vienne, which convened shortly before the dissolution, illustrates the awkwardness of the entire affair. Multiple bishops voiced concern over the legality of dissolving the order without a final verdict. They questioned the process. Some even proposed that new hearings be held. But those voices were suppressed, not because they were incorrect, but because they were inconvenient. The king desired closure. The pope required political survival. Thus, the dissenters fell silent. And what of justice? What of those thousands of knights who served loyally without accusation or scandal? Many were absorbed into other orders. Some received pensions. Others simply faded from history, their names lost in parish ledgers or burial records. They were not judged because there was no judgment. Their orders simply vanished beneath them, like a trap door pulled mid-sentence. One has journeyed with these knights through the storm. The arrests on October 13th, the whispered tortures, the coded rituals, the quiet absolution. One has followed them across seas, into shadows, into the lodges and vaults of imagination. But now we arrive at the end of the road, and it is paved not with answers, but with questions. Was the trial of the Templars a cover for a financial assassination? Was it a spiritual reckoning for secret practices? Or was it a political chess match enacted over parchment and power? Did they deserve their fate? Or were they simply too affluent, too proud, too independent to endure in a world where church and crown had begun to blur? One modern historian referred to the Templar trial as the most sophisticated piece of character assassination in medieval Europe. That is one interpretation. Another is to call it a play without a final act, a case file that remains open but unassigned. Even Jacques de Molay's final words resist clarity. His curse, if it was authentic, became a convenient echo when both Pope and King died within a year of his execution. But coincidence is not causality, and poetry is not proof. Still, it lingers, does it not? Now, let us step back. Consider the trial not merely as an event, but as a mirror. It reflected the fears of the age. Fear of power without oversight, of wealth beyond taxation, of loyalty pledged to something other than crown or cross. The Templars were not saints, but neither were they demons. They were complex, and complexity rarely thrives in eras of absolutes. And that, perhaps, is the most haunting aspect of all, because when all the evidence is examined, neatly stacked, the soot and scribbles brushed away, one is left with a strange emptiness. A case that was heard around the world, but never truly concluded. No final verdict, no complete truth, just a series of silences carefully crafted to resemble justice. And perhaps that is why the story never dies, because it is unfinished. So one stands in the center of this windowless chamber. No judges, no jury, no gavel, only the specter of a question. What exactly was on trial? A man, an order, a dream, one must decide. Or not. Perhaps it is preferable that way, for some trials never truly end. The fire has long since subsided. The walls have crumbled. The towers have fallen, their banners claimed by wind and moss. But in the hush that follows history, one figure remains. Not in armor, not in chains, merely a man, obscured by time, silhouetted in the smoke of memory, waiting, watching, still on trial. Jacques de Molay's ashes long ago dispersed into the Seine, but the questions that adhered to his life never fully settled. They drifted into the bloodstream of narrative, seeping quietly into manuscripts, murals, and whispered conversations over dusty shelves. And now, centuries later, one continues to listen. The world has transformed since 1314. Monarchs are less numerous. The church no longer commands armies. Fortresses decay. Archives are digitized. Secrets become hashtags. But some stories refuse to be tamed by time. They remain as half-open doors, as drafts in the stonework, as flickering lights in the darkness. And the tale of the Templars, of their sudden collapse, their enduring myth, and their ambiguous truth is one such story, because at its core, it is not solely about knights, or treasure, or lost rituals. It is about power, about what individuals do when they perceive a threat, about how fear arrays itself in the guise of justice, and how silence can be mistaken for closure. It is also about faith, not only the kind articulated in Latin beneath stained glass, but the quieter kind, faith in institutions, in evidence, in memory, and how readily that faith is tested when the pages begin to disappear. Jacques de Molay is gone. So too are the cardinals, the kings, the scribes who penned their justifications in thick ink. But the verdict never came. And so, symbolically, the last Templar remains on the stand, his gaze steady, his mouth closed, not pleading, not accusing, merely waiting. And in a sense, so are we. For as long as the story endures, the trial continues. A final breath now. The candles flicker one last time. The chamber fades, and silence descends, not as an ending, but as an echo.